Welcome to Lola's Frugal Life Podcast. If you're on a mission to be more frugal with both your time and money, you're in the right place. In this podcast, we talk about topics that help enhance living a frugal lifestyle. The goal is to save time and money where we can so that we can use the rest on what matters most to us. We talk a lot about both time and money management so that we can waste as little as possible on both. We do this while also embracing a progress over perfection mindset. If that sounds good to you, then please stick around for the latest episode right after a few quick words from our sponsor. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lola's Frugal Life Podcast. So today marks the 3 years anniversary of this podcast. Not exactly today, but roughly today. Middle of April was my first episode ever of the podcast, April of 2020. So it's really hard to believe that this is 3 years that I've been doing this podcast. I never in my life would have thought that I would have a podcast that millions of people listen to each week. Just kidding. There's a bit less than 1 million people listening to my podcast. But seriously though, I never would have imagined having a podcast with actual listeners and some really great positive reviews on Apple Podcasts, and it's just really pretty amazing that I've done this. Like, I'm really proud that I've accomplished this and that I've actually been going for 3 years straight. So what I wanted to focus this episode on for my anniversary episode is to stop waiting for the perfect time. Because when I first started this podcast, it took quite a while before I confidently knew that some of the listeners, like the listen counts that it shows in my podcast app, were actually not me or my husband. And now, while I still have a long way to go, I do have what I consider a successful podcast. Not like a major success, but it is a success. I have a real audience and some people who continue to tune in each week. And not only that, but this is the 399th episode. It's really hard to believe that I've sat down to record my podcast almost 400 times. So similar to what I believe I did last year and the year before, I'd like to use this as an example of how we can do things that we never thought we could have or would have done. So I wanted to focus on what often holds us back from doing these things, and that is waiting for the perfect time to do something. So this episode is going to be focusing on stop waiting for the perfect time. But before we get into the rest of the comments that I want to talk about this episode, I do want to just share, I got another review, and I always like to read them because I think it's so nice of people to leave a review for me on Apple Podcasts, because it really helps so much with growing this show. And this person that left the review actually had contacted me on Instagram too, so it was just really nice. And again, like a lot of the other reviews I've been getting lately, she really loves the meal plan episodes. So the review was left by Eli Patton 8313, and it says, "Love this," and it's 5 stars, and it says, "Thank you so much for the weekly meal plan episodes. I did my meal planning today and it took me so much less time. Can't wait to try out the new recipes you shared. Not to mention, I got hungry just listening. Haha." So thank you again so much. And it was nice speaking with you or having our quick little interaction on Instagram when you shared my podcast to your story. That was super nice, and I really appreciate it. So I just wanted to share that as part of this episode. But anyway, so back to stop waiting for the perfect time. So the thing is that when we wait for the perfect time, it can cause us to miss opportunities because we fail to take action on things we would like to accomplish. And this can be something as little as doing a cleaning project you've been putting off to something large like starting a business. It can kind of impact almost every range of tasks or projects that you want to work on in your life. Sometimes the perfect time can just mean when we have time, and we might think, I'll do that when I'm not busy. I haven't yet found a time in my life where there is an abundance of time to just like work on all these random projects. So by starting now with what little bit of time you might be able to find is going to help you to get things accomplished, because it's so much better to get a little bit done over a longer period of time rather than getting nothing done while you wait for the perfect time to come, because it never comes. There's never the perfect time. We're always busy. Other things always come up. New priorities arrive. So there really is no perfect time. And often starting something can be really difficult. So we allow things to hold us back from beginning them because we don't know how to approach them sometimes. Perfectionism, like I talk about frequently, perfectionism is often something that can cause us to delay starting a project because we're not sure exactly how to do it. So instead of just getting started, we continue to delay. Did you ever have one of those projects that you delayed for the longest time because you didn't know how to approach it? I know I have them, especially in my work, like in my like real job. That happens to me all the time. I'll have things in my planner and I'll keep moving it because I just don't want to deal with it. And then almost always, once I finally decide to tackle it, I find out that it was probably like the simplest thing and I don't know why I put it off for so long. Sometimes we just don't want to start a project because we think we're going to fail at it too, or we don't know how to approach it. So even if you think you're going to fail at something, really think about what that failure might mean. It's probably not even anything that's going to have a major impact on your life. Usually when you fail at something like that, it's just going to be an opportunity to learn. So try to work on, if this is an area where you struggle, really try and work on getting yourself past that starting point, because that's often what holds us up to get moving on things that we want to accomplish. And then learn as you go. You don't have to have everything figured out before you start a project. You'll learn as you go and make adjustments along the way. Did you ever hear that saying, you don't know what you don't know? Well, if you haven't heard it, now you have. But it's very true. Once you get started, you will start to come across things that you don't know how to approach. And the only way to find out what those things are is by getting started. And then once you find out what you don't know, you can start seeking out information to keep you going and start to learn more things to keep you going along on whatever it is you're working on. And that kind of reminds me just like a really quick, funny little story I can share here. Totally not really related to the podcast, but this episode rather, but it just kind of reminded me because YouTube is a great resource to like learn things as you go. If you need to look up a resource to learn something that you're not sure how to do, usually you can find it on YouTube. And one time, me and my husband took my horse and my sister's horse out to a park because we were going to do a trail ride. My husband doesn't really ride, but he'll just, he just was going to come along. We were just going to do a nice little ride. And if you're not familiar with horse riding that much, there's different like riding disciplines. So like I ride English, my sister rides Western. So there are different saddles and different ways you get them on the horse and that type of thing. So I wasn't even thinking that I grabbed my sister's Western saddle for my husband to use, and I had my English saddle for my horse. So we get to the park and with the horses, and I go to put the saddle on my sister's horse, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to put this Western saddle on. And we're standing like at the park, just kind of like, all right, well, I got to figure out how to do this because I have no idea how to put the saddle on, and I need it on so my husband can ride my sister's horse. So we looked it up on YouTube, and we're standing there in the park with the horses, watching a YouTube video on my phone while I tied this Western girth. It's hard to explain if you don't know how it would do. But it was just a funny story, like, tacking up a horse, and I'm sitting there with a phone in my hand, like watching how to get the saddle on properly. So anyway, you can learn as you go. There's so many different resources. YouTube is a great one, but there's a lot of different ways to learn things as you go. So don't let that cause you to delay in starting something that you really would like to do. And another thing is, if you just start instead of waiting for the perfect time, you're going to accomplish more in life. By starting instead of waiting for things to be perfect, you are just, due to the nature of that, you're going to get more done because you're doing instead of waiting. You can take advantage of opportunities when they come up instead of always kind of waiting for exactly the right time to do something. By practicing, instead of just always planning and waiting, you'll begin to see how much more you're actually able to do. And again, this doesn't have to be with big projects and goals. The little things count too. Those little things that you have in your home that you're like, oh yeah, I got to get to that. Oh yeah, I got to get to that. When I have time, I'll do this. When I have time, I'll do that. Just try and find those little times, those little bits of time that you have, and just start instead of waiting for the perfect time to happen. You know, like something I can say with that, that just reminded me too of something in my personal life. Some of you know, I started an Etsy shop under the podcast name. It's Lola's Frugal. It's not the podcast, but it just is like Lola's Frugal Life. It's an Etsy shop. I do spreadsheets all the time. I love making spreadsheets. I actually find it's harder to make spreadsheets for people to actually purchase, because when I use a spreadsheet, like I just know like what I'm trying to do and how it's got to look, and it doesn't have to look pretty, whatever. But, you know, I wanted to do this, and I've wanted to do it for the longest time. And I wish now that I would have started sooner, because there's so many shops on there doing exactly what I'm doing. And I got the ideas from them. It's not like some original idea that I thought of, but had I started way back when, like years ago, I could have had this huge shop set up with all of these great spreadsheets that people could purchase. But instead, I started now, and you know, maybe 2-3 years from now, I'll be so glad that I started now, because then I'll look back and say, wow, look at all that this I've accomplished. But I had delayed for so long instead of just starting back when I first saw that this was something that you could do. And I love making these spreadsheets, and I'm like, this is a great idea, because once each one is created, you can sell it over and over again, and it's just content that can be available for people to utilize as tools to help them in their life. But anyway, so I'm like way behind on that now, because I think I have like 11 spreadsheets now in my shop. Like I'm way behind, and I'm trying to figure out like a niche so that I can have things that people will actually find. And anyway, it's just the point that, you know, had I not kept delaying on that, because I thought, well, it's not worth the time, there's too many people out there already. But really, even with so many people already doing it, had I done it and built a quality shop with quality spreadsheets and budget and time management tools, I could have been way ahead in that aspect that I'm working on than I am now. So just, you know, think of what you could have accomplished by this time had you started something years ago, and then just apply that to the future and think, okay, well, if I do start this now, 2-3 years from now, I'll be saying, wow, look at what I did. I'm so glad I didn't wait. And then just another thing to think about too is that starting something can often feel really scary, but by doing the thing, you're going to wind up gaining confidence as you go along. When I started this podcast, I felt so crazy when I published my first episode. It was really scary and intimidating knowing that what I just recorded was out there for anyone to hear. But I didn't stay intimidated for too long, because literally no one listened. So it wasn't really that scary when I saw that literally no one was listening. But in a way, it ended up helping me, because I just kept going. And then, you know, as I kept going, I got more confident, and then I started getting some listeners, and it just kind of built over time. And, you know, I kept reading and hearing these things that if you just keep plugging away at something, most likely you're eventually going to have some level of success. Because what happens is a lot of people wind up giving up sooner, like with this podcast, say. I keep talking about this podcast as an example because this is the anniversary episode, so I'm trying to use it as an example. But the thing is that, you know, a lot of people would have quit sooner than I, but I continued to, and I was going to say sooner than I did. I didn't quit. I'm not going to quit. But a lot of people would have given up because it takes a really long time to get any number of listeners, unless you have like a huge advertising budget maybe, and you have like maybe someone really famous, or you're totally new that nobody's doing, or it's really hard to get your podcast found. And it can be really discouraging when you're working really hard and putting all this time in and trying to come up with ideas and all this stuff, and then you're like, oh, like there's nobody listening to this. So it can be really easy to just quit, but because there's a lot less people that choose not to quit and just keep going, you do wind up with some level of success. So again, if you just start and you're not confident, you will gain confidence as you go along. So, and even with the, even if you don't wind up having success, it'll still give you more confidence to take on other things. Some things, obviously, everything's not going to be a success, but by doing the thing and learning from it, you'll be more confident to try something new, or maybe you'll get an idea on how to do that type of thing, but in a different way. So anyway, to wrap up this episode, I just want to encourage you to just start. Whatever it is that you might want to do that you've been holding back on, consider making a decision to just start it if you're able to. Don't wait for the perfect time or the perfect way to know how to do something, because done is always better than perfect. And continuous improvement comes over time. So while perfection may never be achieved, it's a whole lot better to have done something than to never start while you're waiting for the perfect situation to arise. I had no idea how to podcast or what to say or what I would do when I started this podcast. And even 3 years later, with a little bit more of a format, I'm still uncertain if I could be doing this differently or in a better way. But because I've continued to plug away at it every week for the last 3 years, I've begun to grow a real audience, and I consider this to be a success. So as a celebration of my 3 years of podcasting, use this as an example of what you can accomplish by just jumping in and giving it a shot. So don't wait for the perfect time to start. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm really excited to be celebrating 3 years this week. And that's it for this week. So I will see you back here next week. So thank you for checking in for this podcast episode. And don't forget, you can always email me with any questions or suggestions at lolasfrugallife@gmail.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at lolasfrugallife. And you can find a blog post for most of my episodes and definitely all of my meal plan episodes at lolasfrugallife.com. You can also join our private listeners group at facebook.com/groups/lolasfrugallife. And if you enjoy the show, please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen from. And I would love it if you would screenshot the show and tag me on Instagram so I could see you're listening. Also, if you can please take a couple of seconds to rate and review the podcast. Those ratings and reviews are what help the show come up better in search results so that other people can find this podcast. So that will really help me in growing my audience. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an awesome day.